the night the gates closed. If you think this story is wild, wait till you hear what really happens behind the walls of Wolston Prison. Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's step inside a world most people will never see and few ever escape. The rain was coming down hard that night, streaking across the razor wire like veins of lightning. The guard towers at Wolston Prison cut through the storm with their white beams, scanning the yard where a dozen inmates stood motionless, drenched, silent, eyes fixed on the east gate. A siren had gone off only minutes earlier. No one knew why. But everyone felt it. Something wasn't right. Inside the maximum security wing, Officer Nathan Cole's radio crackled. Unit 3, lockdown initiated. Inmate missing. Repeat, inmate missing. Cole froze. He'd worked at Wolston for 13 years, and he'd seen fights, riots, even escape attempts. But this voice, the panic in the command center, this was different. He looked down the corridor. The cells were sealed, the lights flickering from the storm outside. But one door, cell 47, was open, wide open. And inside, the bed was soaked with blood. The inmate missing was not just anyone. His name was Daniel Hurst, a convicted murderer serving life without parole. Known for his violent temper and his eerie calm, Hurst had been at Wolston for 8 years. He rarely spoke, never smiled, and kept a small notebook under his mattress filled with cryptic sketches of doors, tunnels, and hands reaching from walls. No one knew what it meant. Until now. Cole called it in, his voice steady, but his hands shaking. Cell 47, inmate gone, there's blood. Looks like he's hurt or someone else is. Within minutes, alarms echoed through the concrete halls. Gates slammed shut. The prison became a fortress of steel and fear. Detective Sarah Mallory was called in before dawn. She'd handled organized crime, murder cases, and corruption scandals, but prisons were different. Prisons were alive. She arrived as the storm broke, stepping through mud and broken branches as floodlights illuminated the soaked yard. The warden met her at the gate, his face pale. "Detective, Hurst didn't just vanish," he said quietly. "He left something behind." They led her to cell 47. The blood on the mattress was still wet, dripping onto the cold floor. But on the wall, written with something dark and sticky, were 5 words. "The gate never really closes." Mallory's gut twisted. "This isn't an escape," she murmured. "It's a message." She spent the next hours combing through footage from the security cameras. Every corridor, every cell block, every door. Nothing. It was as if Daniel Hurst had walked through solid walls. The last image of him was at 10:14 p.m., sitting quietly on his bed, staring straight into the camera. His eyes were calm. Too calm. Then static. The feed cut out for 12 minutes. When it came back, he was gone. Mallory turned to the warden. Who had access to this block during those 12 minutes? The warden hesitated. Only a few officers and one counselor. Name? He exhaled. Dr. Ethan Grady. Dr. Grady was the prison psychologist, a man with soft eyes and a habit of talking too much. He'd been working with Hurst for nearly a year, trying to understand him, as he put it. But his notes, now retrieved from his office, told a different story. Page after page filled with conversations that sounded less like therapy and more like planning. Mallory read one line twice. "He believes the walls remember. He says the real prison is not made of stone, it's made of silence." By nightfall, the storm had cleared. But inside Wolston, tension was suffocating. Guards searched every corner. Dogs sniffed through the tunnels. Yet there was still no sign of Daniel Hurst or Dr. Grady. At 8:47 p.m., a guard found something strange in the industrial laundry room, a trail of muddy footprints leading to the back wall. It looked solid, but when Mallory pressed her hand against the concrete, she felt a faint vibration, air moving behind it. "Get me a flashlight," she ordered. They pried open a panel behind the washing machines and discovered a narrow passage carved into the wall, just wide enough for one person to crawl through. The smell was foul, a mix of damp cement and old blood. The tunnel stretched deep, far beyond what the prison blueprints showed. Mallory's light caught something on the ground, a torn piece of blue fabric, prison uniform material, soaked in sweat and grime. Then, deeper in the tunnel, something else glinted, a small metallic object half buried in the dirt. She picked it up. It was a key. An old one, handcrafted. The number 47 engraved into the handle. "Why would he leave this?" one of the guards muttered. Mallory turned the key over in her hand, her mind racing. "Because he wants us to follow," she whispered. They crawled forward, inch by inch, the walls closing in. The tunnel bent left, then right, and ended abruptly at a rusted metal door. Behind it, faintly, they could hear dripping water and the echo of something moving. Mallory gripped the handle. The hinges groaned. The air grew cold. And then she froze. The light from her flashlight fell on something written across the door in bold, black paint. "Welcome to the real prison." The guards exchanged looks, nervous, waiting for her to open it. Mallory took a deep breath and turned the key. The lock clicked once, then the door creaked open, revealing a dark room beyond. But what they found inside changed everything. The room that shouldn't exist. The hinges wailed as the heavy steel door swung open, spilling a beam of pale light into a chamber that smelled of rust, mold, and something else. Something human. Detective Sarah Mallory's flashlight trembled slightly in her hand as she stepped inside. The air was heavy, unmoving, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The room was small, 10 feet by maybe 15. The walls lined with decaying insulation and old brick. But what drew everyone's eyes was the wall opposite the entrance. It was covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Some old and yellowed, others new enough that the ink still glistened. Every photo showed a face. Some were mugshots. Some were candid, inmates in the yard, officers at their posts, medical staff, even janitors. Pinned above all of them, written in dark marker, "They never left." Mallory's heart thudded. "Who took these?" she whispered. One of the guards swallowed hard. "Ma'am, that's Officer Grady in some of those." She stepped closer, squinting at the top row. There he was, Dr. Ethan Grady, the missing prison psychologist, standing beside a group of inmates in an old black and white photo dated 1998. But that was impossible. Grady wasn't even employed at Wolston back then. The sound of dripping water echoed through the room. Mallory turned toward the back wall and froze. A section of the concrete had crumbled away, revealing what looked like an old drainage tunnel. But there was something written above the hole, scrawled in dried blood. "The ones who talk disappear." The lights flickered. For a moment, Mallory thought she heard faint breathing coming from the tunnel. She aimed her flashlight down it. The beam caught movement. Someone was down there. "Hello," she called out. No answer. Just the slow scrape of metal against stone. The guards tensed. One of them raised his baton. "Detective, we should wait for backup." Mallory shook her head. "If Hust is alive, this might be our only chance to find him." They stepped forward into the narrow tunnel, their footsteps echoing in the dark. The air grew colder, wetter, until the walls began to glisten with condensation. After 20 yards, they reached a small iron gate, and beyond it another room. This one was different. Cleaner. Newer. Inside were 2 metal chairs, a desk, and on the desk, a tape recorder still running, the reel spinning silently. Next to it lay a folder marked Patient 47. Mallory hit the stop button, then rewind. A click. Then a voice crackled through the static, calm, low, deliberate. "Dr. Grady, you said they buried them here." "Who is they, Daniel?" "Hearst. The ones who built this place. The ones who made it disappear." Dr. Grady. Disappear? Hearst. Wolston wasn't built to hold men. It was built to hide them. Mallory stopped the tape. Her chest felt tight. "Get this to forensics," she ordered, handing it off. She flipped open the folder. Inside were transcripts of therapy sessions, detailed sketches of tunnels, secret chambers, and something labeled Sublevel C, a section that didn't exist on any of the prison's blueprints. At the bottom of the folder was a map drawn in pencil, with one area circled in red. Old boiler room. Back upstairs, The warden denied everything. Sublevel C? There's no such thing, he said, pacing nervously. We've renovated this prison 4 times. If there was a lower level, we'd know about it. Mallory leaned forward. Then why does your psychologist have blueprints that show it? The warden's face went pale. By evening, Mallory assembled a small team to search the lower levels of the facility. They descended through maintenance tunnels behind the kitchen, passing pipes that hissed and rattled like snakes. The deeper they went, the older the structure became, newer concrete giving way to cracked brick and iron. Finally, they found it. A rusted door half buried behind a wall of pipes, welded shut. The number C carved crudely into the frame. It took them 30 minutes to cut through. When the door finally gave way, a gust of stale air rushed out, thick with decay. Flashlights swept over the darkness. The floor was littered with broken restraints, rusted bed frames, and old medical equipment. Stenciled on one of the walls in faded letters, Wolston Research Division. Mallory's voice broke the silence. This wasn't a prison wing, this was a lab. She found a table stacked with folders wrapped in plastic. Some were labeled Behavioral Conditioning, Project 9, and Inmate Response Trials. The documents inside were horrifying, reports of psychological experiments conducted on prisoners under the guise of rehabilitation. Isolation chambers, sensory deprivation, enforced silence for months at a time. Most subjects were marked as deceased or unaccounted for. Mallory's stomach turned. This can't be real. Then, from behind the far wall, came a noise, slow, deliberate. Footsteps. The guards raised their lights. "Who's there?" one shouted. A shadow moved at the end of the hall. Then a voice echoed through the darkness.
"Come."
Familiar. "You shouldn't have come here." It was Dr. Grady. His white coat was torn, streaked with grime. His eyes were sunken, but his expression, that eerie calm, hadn't changed. "Doctor," Mallory said carefully, "where's Daniel Hurst?" Grady smiled faintly. "He's free now. Freer than you'll ever be." Mallory stepped closer. "What did you do down here?" Grady tilted his head. "I didn't build this place. I just woke it up." Suddenly, the lights cut out. Total darkness. Shouting. The slam of metal. Then silence. When power returned seconds later, Grady was gone, and in his place, on the wall behind where he stood, was a fresh message scrawled in red dust. "It's not over. The rail gate opens below." Mallory's pulse thundered. She turned toward the sound of rushing air and saw that part of the floor near the boiler had collapsed, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into blackness. She gripped her flashlight tighter, her voice barely a whisper. "God help us. There's another level." And as she took her first step down, she realized something chilling. The tunnel walls were lined with names.
Hundreds of them.
All inmates listed as missing from Wolston Prison dating back more than 30 years. The truth buried beneath Wolston. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just another prison story. It's the kind that keeps you awake at night. Before we dive into the final chapter, make sure you've subscribed because after what happens next, you'll never look at a prison the same way again. The air grew colder the farther Detective Sarah Mallory descended. Each step down the rusted staircase creaked under her boots. Her flashlight flickered across walls etched with names, hundreds of them. Everyone an inmate who had supposedly vanished from Wolston over the last 3 decades. The deeper she went, the more the air began to change. Damp turned to stagnant. Silence turned to something heavier. At the bottom, she found herself standing before a sealed steel hatch, the words, "Authorized personnel only," almost erased by age. She forced it open with the help of 2 guards. The hinges screamed, and a wall of humid air hit them like breath from the earth itself. The chamber beyond was vast, far larger than any structure could logically exist beneath the prison. It looked like an underground facility, with concrete floors, rusted rails, and corridors that stretched into darkness. Machinery lay in heaps, half dismantled, and on one side stood a row of cells, smaller, older, each fitted with heavy iron doors. Mallory's light caught movement. A camera lens, not old, still blinking red in the corner. "Someone's been down here recently," she murmured. Then she heard it. The faint hum of electricity. They followed the sound into a smaller room. Inside stood rows of medical beds, each one with leather restraints and 4 lines still hanging. Folders littered the floor, stamped with a faded government seal. Department of Justice, Behavioral Adaptation Program. Mallory picked one up, her hands trembling as she read the top page. Subject number 47. Hurst, Daniel. Behavioral modification results successful. Proceed with deep-level reconditioning. Her breath caught. They were experimenting on inmates. A guard whispered, "This isn't prison rehabilitation. This is control." The realization hit like a punch. Wolston wasn't just a correctional facility. It had been the site of an abandoned government program meant to erase violent behavior through psychological reprogramming. But somewhere along the way, it had gone wrong. Mallory moved toward a row of cabinets labeled Archive, year 1992. She opened one and froze. Inside were videotapes, hundreds of them. She slid one into a player still connected to a monitor. Static filled the screen, then an image. A man strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to his head. A voice, unmistakably Dr. Grady's, spoke from behind the camera. "Dr. Grady, patient 47, session 21. He no longer recalls his name, but still draws the door. When asked what's behind it, he says, freedom." The inmate on the screen raised his head. His eyes were hollow, but his lips formed words. "The gate never really closes." Mallory felt her stomach twist. The same phrase found in her cell. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the chamber. They turned. One of the guards had disappeared. His flashlight lay on the floor, beam pointing toward another passage. Mallory shouted his name, but only her echo answered. They followed the light. The passage led to a maintenance corridor lined with pipes and cables. And, at the end, another door slightly ajar. The smell of rust and oil mixed with something metallic, like old blood. Mallory pushed it open. The guard was there, alive, but trembling. He pointed ahead, unable to speak. At the center of the room sat Daniel Hurst. He was barefoot, wearing torn prison trousers, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Around him were dozens of tape reels, each labeled with numbers and initials. The glow from a single hanging bulb cast long shadows across his face. "Daniel," Mallory said quietly, "it's over. You need to come with us." He smiled faintly, eyes distant. "Over," he murmured. "You don't understand. They let me out because I'm the proof." Mallory took a cautious step forward. "Proof of what?" Hurst looked up, his gaze sharp and lucid for the first time. "That it worked. They broke me, rebuilt me, and buried the rest down here. I was their success story, but they couldn't control what came next." Before Mallory could respond, a voice came from behind her. "He's right." Dr. Grady stepped out from the shadows, holding a pistol steady in his hand. His face was calm, almost serene. "Detective, please. This has nothing to do with you. The program was never shut down. It was perfected. You shouldn't have come this far." Mallory's heart pounded. "You tortured men under the name of science. You buried evidence. You killed them." Grady shook his head.
No.
"We saved them. We erased their violence. But the process, it erased more than that. It erased who they were. The ones who couldn't adapt. We kept them down here.
Silent.
Peaceful." Mallory raised her weapon. "Drop the gun, Grady." For a moment, the world held its breath. Then a single shot echoed. The light swung. Hurst had lunged, tackling Grady to the floor. The gun skittered away, clattering against the concrete. A flash, another shot. Screams. Then silence. When the smoke cleared, both men were down. Grady was gone, lifeless. Hurst lay bleeding, but smiling. He looked up at Mallory. "You think you've closed it, but the gate's already open." His voice faded. His pulse stopped. Mallory stood frozen, the sound of dripping water filling the silence. "The gate." The phrase repeated in her head. She turned toward the far wall. and realized what he meant. There was another tunnel, wider, leading deeper, and along the walls, fresh sets of footprints. Mallory stared into the dark, her voice barely audible. Someone's still down there. But before they could move, the entire chamber shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deep below, machinery roared to life. Red emergency lights blinked on one by one. "Evacuate!" Mallory shouted. They raced up the stairwell as the lower level rumbled beneath them. Concrete cracked, pipes burst, steam hissed violently through the corridors. By the time they reached the surface, the ground itself seemed to exhale, and the old boiler section collapsed in on itself. Days later, investigators sealed off the site. Every record, every file, every photograph from that underground level vanished into federal custody. Official reports cited structural damage and flooding. Wolston Prison quietly resumed operations. Detective Sarah Mallory was transferred out of the case. She never spoke publicly about what she found, but every few weeks, she'd receive an anonymous envelope. No return address. Inside, always the same thing, a black and white photo. An inmate's face. And written across the back, "They never left." If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because next time, the truth won't stay buried for long.